All right, happy Saturday morning, everybody. Here is the World History Paleolithic Review. Up here we have our cave paintings, which we remember are from Spain, France, and North Africa. All connotating animals, large pieces of game that were important to the early people. It also shows us that people, no matter where they are going to do roughly the same thing about the same time. And when we stereotypically think of the caveman, we think of this nice hairy guy right here. Oh, I have rock, boom, boom, all right? Not very bright. And over this time, prehistory, the Paleolithic, Old Stone Age era, humans are slowly going to evolve and work out intricate bits of technology with a trusty stick, then attaching a sharp stone to that stick. And eventually become quite sophisticated, like the Austrian Icemen here seen in the University of Innsbruck. But the beginning of history, as people grow over time, is the longest period of human history, going all the way to about 10,000 BC. During this time, people had to evolve and figure everything out for themselves. So it is known as the Paleolithic, or Old Stone Age, from the first cavemen, like this guy, to the first stone toolmakers. At this time, people were nomadic. They moved around constantly, having to move every single day to follow those herds of game. They had to follow their food supply. So they maxed out their numbers at a maximum number of 20 to 30. That way they could move quickly. They didn't have that much to pack up, unlike AG Money going to the beach with 4 suitcases. And if you get more than 30 people, it makes it very difficult to feed. Imagine, as we said, cooking Thanksgiving dinner every single day. Everyone contributed to the group. The men hunted and fished. The women gathered fruits, nuts, and berries. So there was complete gender equality, because everyone had to work in order for the entire group to survive. Remember the story of catching the bicycle bird down in Songwe village in Zimbabwe. And so we know that the earliest humans are found over here in East Africa. Dr. Marion Louis Leakey and Dr. Donald Johansen, where we find Lucy, the skeleton, about 2 million years old. And from this area, the great human migration began up into North Africa, into Europe, into the Middle East and Asia, down into Australia. Good day, Mike. Put another shrimp on the bobby here. And eventually through Asia, across the Bering Strait. And how do we remember humans traveled the Bering Strait? They looked at their compass, they took their bearings, and they went straight. Exactly. Little world history humor for you. Eventually populating North and South America. Near the end of the Paleolithic era, it began to get very cold as the glaciers descended upon the earth. Some positives and negatives here. When they receded, they left some thick, rich soil. Very good for growing crops. The other thing the cold weather did is it killed off a lot of the inhabitants of the earth. Those who were not strong enough to survive or not bright enough to live in a cave and store some food died off. So everybody who lived through this was a little bit stronger and a little bit smarter. And the Ice Age allowed that land bridge, the Bering Strait, to go between Asia and North America. Eventually, during this period, a great leap forward in technology is the ability to speak. Most likely humans did it to coordinate during the hunt, to ask for help, to get the woolly mammoth, or to help drive the buffalo off of Pishkin that we talked about. If you get a big piece of game, like the woolly mammoth here, or a buffalo, now you don't have to move every single day. You could sit in one area for a couple days. During this time, not only are we using stone and wooden tools, also made of bone is another option. We learn to communicate, and we also master fire. Nothing is better than having meat that is cooked. Raw meat, if you're in France, steak tartare, fine, but here in America, we like to grill it. And if you think fire, who doesn't like a good bonfire, or Tom Hanks in Castaway? Look, I have created fire. It is used for light, it is used for heat, it is used for protection and communication. Near the end of this, between 11,000 and 9,000 BC, there is a massive quantum leap forward in human history. It is the Neolithic Age, or the New Stone Age. And it's the most incredible, like as I said, Golden Age of Athens, great. Renaissance, beautiful. The Industrial Revolution, the Technological Revolution, those things are all great. But when humans began to farm, it changed the course of human history. We could now stay in one place. We could grow our own crops like this garden. People began to domesticate animals. Sheep, goats, pigs, cows. They began to live in dwellings and in structures. And they had time to sit down in their thinking chair and think, like Steve on Blue's Clues. Labor-saving technology, things that could make their life drastically easier. Also, now that we're staying in one place, there is a food surplus, more food than people can actually use. That allows two things to happen. One is a population explosion, and as I said, those technological labor-saving devices. Now that there's more people, we began to live in villages, like this one here in Saqqara Bra in the Orkney Islands. Now that people are interacting, the way of life has to change. Men and women still have to both work in order to survive, but men slowly begin to dominate the social, the political, and the economic life of the villages. Give me a quick time out here. I have to, as I see, charge my battery, which I didn't think I needed to do. So you can see from this picture right here, everything seems to be going extremely well for the cavemen. We now have clothes. All right, my man's wearing a vest. He's got his shorts on, and the village is still moving along, except now men are becoming dominant. And we're going to have to form some type of government here. Now that we're living together, we have to interact with each other in completely different ways. How do we get along? And people, when they begin to have access to different groups, have what we call as cultural diffusion. The sharing of thoughts, ideas, information, and technology through migration, through warfare, and through trade. At first, the early governments were the heads of each family, usually the elders, because they were more experienced, right? They had been around. They could observe the change of the seasons. They knew when to plant. They knew when to harvest. So we listened to them. Think about baking something with your grandma. Most grandmas don't measure. And you say, Grandma, how do you know that that's a half a cup? And they say, well, I just know because I've done it several thousand times. Eventually, priests who were able to observe the signs of nature convinced the people that they knew what placated, what pleased the gods. So they had to go and pray in the temples while everybody else worked. And they began to take over governments, forming a theocracy or a government based on religion, which we'll talk about in a second. Now that we're living in villages, well, everyone is theoretically still equal. People begin to accumulate more goods, or they work a little bit harder or a little bit longer. And so people begin to collect personal property. And this is the beginning of social classes. Living in the village, we find out that some people have great skill. They're working with their hands. And they do things that are just better than everybody else's. Some people make good pottery. Some guy learns how to use copper and metal and make it into a shovel or a rake. Another person bakes really good bread. so to speak. So they become blacksmiths or coppersmiths or butchers or bakers or candlestick makers or potters. And now people are paying them for their services. If you're the best shovel maker in town, you don't have to go work in the field. You can charge people food for your trade. This elevates you in social class when you have something that everybody else wants. You don't have to work sun up to sundown like the peasants. You can do it in your shop and work whenever you want. These are called artisans. And as we said, modern day artisans, they're very good jobs that people overlook until you actually need one, right? Electrician, plumber, automotive mechanic, HVAC guy, carpenter, all right? It's $100 for the HVAC guy just to pull his van into your driveway before he even looks at what's going on. So we have kings or priests, then we have the artisans, and the bottom level are the slave class, either prisoners of war or criminals. And near the end of this, we have art and architecture. We like to build giant buildings or structures that represent our values and beliefs, what is important to us, like the Sphinx in Egypt, like the pyramids, or the Great Wall of China, Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro in India. It shows what is important to us. We're going to talk Monday about the World Trade Centers, all right? The trade of the world flowing through them. It is what is important. And then religion. The religions were all complex. These religions were polytheistic, which means many gods. The ancient peoples worshiped the gods of nature. God of the wind, God of the rain, God of the sun, God of the moon, all of that stuff. But interestingly enough, people in Africa, Europe, and Asia, we found them even in the Paleolithic era buried with great care. They had clothing, they had tools and weapons, they had food. And a lot of them were buried with that statue of like a goddess who appeared to be pregnant, like from Mother Earth all things grow, showing even in the ancient world a belief in life after death. Big leap forward comes when these villages have to, create laws, find a way to collect taxes, organize defense. And as villages grew bigger and bigger, the king or the chief couldn't do everything by themselves. So they had to get assistance, called a bureaucracy. Remember, Miss Jackson is our principal. She has her 3 assistant principals and then 160 teachers. And to aid them, they developed writing. Pictures or symbols that represented words, like the bumblebee and the maple leaf means a belief. Poor people sent their boys to school because if they passed the rigorous writing school and examination, the family got to leave the field and move up into the temple or the palace with the king. So early on, education leads to economic and life advancement. And near the end, always by a freshwater river, we're ready to become a civilization. And things become city-states, where you have an urban city surrounded by farmland that is self-sufficient. And it operates as its own independent country, like England, France, Germany, the United States, China, Japan, South Africa, Egypt, Kenya, Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, whatever. They have their own ruler, their own laws, their own money system. They could be right next to each other, but they did things differently. Remember in Chapel Hill, we buy things with Tar Heel dollars. In Carborough, we use kale chips or hummus wraps. And in Hillsborough, we trade with like beaver pelt and like shotgun shells or whatever. All right? They're right next to each other. Their ways of life are just completely different. And it's at this time that the village strongman becomes dominant. We went from a council of elders to priests and now strong warriors, because if you are successful, you want to be able to defend it from barbarians who want to take it. And so the first civilization is here in Mesopotamia, followed by Egypt. then the Indus River civilization, and then finally over here to China with the Yellow River. And here we are back in Montana with the buffalo jump. As I told you, it was the way to help them, the young people, become initiated into adulthood during the great fall around this time of year buffalo hunt, where they would go in and the adult braves would be dressed as wolves. The young children would go out and hide underneath these teepees. They would antagonize or mess with the young buffalo and then start a massive stampede. The kids would get up running, the baby buffalo would follow them, the huge bulls would start tromping, and because Montana is flat, you can't tell right up here is a massive sharp cliff. And as the buffaloes would go over the cliff, the people were waiting down there for them. Here is the cliff edge running right here, about 100 feet below. When the people were done, they used the animal, all parts of the animal. The rib cage is a knife, the bladder is a canteen, some of the muscle sinew becomes rope, the tendons become the string for a bow and arrow. You scrape the fur off the hide and you have a waterproof, rainproof, quick portable housing unit. And again, the young children had to run. You can see all the hoof prints from the thousands of buffalo, had to swing down off this cliff before the buffalo ran off. If you made it, you were safe, an adult of the tribe, as you had your fall harvest festival right here. And then the wolves came along, gorged themselves, and the people harvested the wolves using the skin to wick or repel water to stay warm and dry in the long Montana winter. So even though they were Neolithic, they were very sophisticated and smart, and above all, they learned how to adapt to the geography, to use the resources to mold them what was available to suit their needs so they could survive. All right, guys, that's the Unit 1 review. Test is coming up in a week. Watch this as many times as you need, and we'll see you shortly. All right, have a good Saturday.